and we're getting some stairs.
Stewardship is everything.
Welcome back to Foundation Homestead. Today we're going to share with you the process of how Dad built the stairs for the barn. There's a lot that goes into building them and designing them. We hope you find this video helpful.
I wanted to go through a little more detail on how to design steps, and I'll get specifically into what we did on our barn. But to start with, I just want to introduce you to this calculator that I use. I've gone through, 12, 15 different pocket calculators, and invariably on the job site it seemed like I break them. But since I got this one, I've had it for I don't know how many years, quite a while. And it's very beneficial. And the reason I want to show you a little bit about this is because this is where I get all of my numbers, and it does most of the work for me. So everything that I'm going to be showing you is available on this particular app. And as you can see, it's by Build Calc, and you can find that. I'm not necessarily endorsing it. This is what I use, and it's got a lot of information available on it. And everything that I show you here, I will show you how I arrived at that. So this is the first drawing that I want to go over with you. And as I mentioned, this is available on Build Calc. This is right in that calculator. And I'll show you how to access that in a little bit. But just to get started with, I want to show you the three primary parameters that you need to look at when you're going to build a set of steps. The first is the total rise, and what the total rise is from the first floor, I call it the walking surface, to the second floor walking surface. Now if you got multiple stories in a house, that would depend on what floor it is, but for our barn, this is a concrete floor, this is the main floor of the building, and this is the hay mow, or the upstairs. So that total distance is the first thing that you need to calculate. The next is what the run is going to be, and this calculator will figure that out for you if you put in enough parameters. So I'm just going to leave that for the time being. And the third one is how much room you need. This is the open stairwell, basically cut into the second story, so that once you start ascending these steps, when you get directly below this, by code you need to have at least 6 feet 8 inches. So as you can see, if you brought that over here, you're not going to have 6 feet, the 6'8" clearance. And if you go beyond that, you would have more, which is all right. And that might be what you want to do if you've got the space to do that. So now I want to go through how, once you get those parameters plugged in there, exactly how you calculate what it is that you need to know to build your steps. So let's just, for the sake of argument, just to kind of walk through it quickly, I'm just going to say that I'm going to enter 10 feet and say that's my total rise. So I'm going to click the rise button. Now after that's all I've put in there, and from there I can just click on my stair function, and that will take me into the stair function, and basically it says 10 feet, that's what I plugged in. It says that my total run is going to be 12 foot 6 inches, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. And the desired riser height is 7.5 inches. And these are parameters that the calculator just by default puts into the program. So I didn't put this 12 foot 6 in, or the 7.5, or what have you. But as you see here, it has that code, 6 feet 8 inches is the desired headroom. And then the ceiling thickness, that's basically how thick the floor is on the second story. And the stringer size, this puts in a 2x12, and the fractional resolution. So I want it down to the 1/16 of an inch, which is pretty exacting. So these are the input parameters. The bottom part of the screen shows you the calculated results. So basically it says, with my 10-foot rise, my calculated results say that my riser height is going to be 7.5 inches. My number of risers is going to be 16. The size overage is 0. In other words, it comes out evenly. Calculated tread width, that's how deep my steps are going to be, is 10 inches. And that also is a matter of code. The number of treads is 15. And the risers is always one more than the number of treads, because you have a floor that you're leaving and a floor that you're arriving at. And then the rest of this, the calculated angle and whatnot, those are important if you know how to use them. The stringer length, so if I've got a total of 10-foot rise and my stringer length needs to be 15 feet 7.5 inches, so when I go to buy that board to cut my stringers out of, I know how much lumber I need to buy for that. And then the stringer throat is 5 1/4 inches, and the calculated run is 12 foot 6 inches, and that's what's here. So now I'm going to begin to change this a little bit, because this is just a personal preference. By code, your riser height is not supposed to be over 7 3/4 of an inch. So that to me is not a comfortable step. I always like to stay 7 inches or less. So I'm going to put in here that I want my desired riser height to be 7 inches. I'm going to click done. And then I'm going to go down here to riser limit. But before I do that, perhaps I should go down. Since I've changed one of my parameters to 7 inches, I'm going to go down here, and now instead of 7.5 inches, it is calculated at 7 1/16. Now this little emblem here, and this is one thing that I didn't really find. It's probably in there someplace, I just haven't found it, what this little symbol means. But basically what it's saying is telling me that there's something about this calculated figure that may not conform directly to my desired height. So I want it to be 7 inches. It ends up being 7 1/16, and if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. But now we notice that the riser has changed to 17 and my treads are 16, so I've just increased my stairway by 1 step. Now you may not be able to do that depending on how much of your headroom that you have to work with and some other parameters on your building. If it's new construction, well, then you can do whatever you desire to do. But now I'm going to go back and change one thing. I want my riser height to be 7 inches, but this says riser limited, and it's off. Now I'm going to turn that on, which means that it's not going to allow my riser height to go above 7 inches. So it's got to be 7 inches or less. Now, if you're going through any of this, see all of these eyes information. If I'm not real sure what that means, all I have to do is click on that information button, and it'll tell me what it's asking for, or what that will influence, how that will influence my outcome. So it says indicated on or off, and you can read that for yourself if you have this calculator. But I turned it on, and so now my riser height will be 7 inches or less. So now I'm going to go down and see what it did to my calculated results, and now it's changed it from 7, started out at 7.5, I changed it to 7 inches, changed that to 7 1/16, and now I said it can't go over 7 inches. I've got my riser limited on. Now I go down here, and my calculated riser height is now 6 11/16. But now notice again that it has increased my number of risers to 18 and my number of treads to 17. And again, you may or may not be able to do that depending on the opening, the finished opening on the second floor. So I want that to take place. Now, as a result of doing all of this and changing this one parameter here, my desired riser height 7 inches, can't go over 7 inches. I turned my limited on, so now I've changed all of these parameters. But what you'll know here notice here is on my calculated tread width, that's basically how deep are my steps going to be where I place my foot. So my calculated tread width is 8 and 13/16 of an inch. Well, when you calculate that, what you'll discover is that that's under code. By code, it needs to be at least 10 inches, and I'll show this to you in just a little bit. It needs to be 10 inches, but functionally it needs to be 11 inches, because if it's 10 inches, that's the amount of your stringer that you cut for your tread. But then if it's 10 inches there, then you need to have at least a 1-inch bull nose on your step. So basically you need to end up with at least 11 inches of surface area for your foot to land on as you're ascending these steps or descending them, whatever the case might be. So this little icon again is indicating to me that there's something wrong with that calculation, and I don't want that to be less than 10 inches. So now what I'm going to do is go back up here to my inputted parameters, and you'll remember that all I put in there was my overall height of 10 feet. I did not put this in. That was a default within the calculator. But to correct that, all I have to do is go in and tap that, and I'm just going to put in 0 and say done. Now what it has done for me, since I put in 0, in other words, I don't know what that needs to be, now it's using these other parameters, the 10-foot rise, the 7-inch desired riser height, and I want it limited to that. Now it's going to give me this parameter. Now it's saying that my run needs to be, to maintain my 10-inch tread width, my run needs to be 14 feet 2 inches instead of the 12 foot 10 or whatever it was before. So again, that changes everything down here. So now my stringer length was 15 feet, now it's 17 feet 1/2 inch. So again, I need to know what that's going to be before I go and buy the lumber that I'm going to use for my stringers. And so once we put that in, it didn't change my risers, my number of risers. I still have 18, and my treads is still 17. My overage is 0, and then there is a fluctuation. Riser overage or underage is 3/8 of an inch. So we have all of this information, and this is another important thing. So the minimum finished stairwell opening, in other words, that's the hole that's cut in the second story that gives me access to the second story and maintains my 6 foot 8 inch headroom. So now that opening has to be 11 foot 3 5/16 of an inch. Now again, if you're doing this in existing building, and we run into this all the time when we're working on houses that are 100+ years old, it seemed that in that day and age, you know, it's almost if you had a ladder to the second story, that was sufficient. But most of those stairs, what you'll find is they're really steep and the steps are really narrow, and the risers are pretty tall. So when you go into a situation like that and try to build a set of steps, it's difficult because you don't have enough room to make those steps meet code, and if you change them at all, you need to bring them up to code. So sometimes that gets to be a real head scratcher to figure out how that can be accomplished, and sometimes you have to sacrifice some room someplace else, eliminate a closet or something to make that work. So these are all of the calculations that you need, and this calculator will do a great deal of help in finding out what numbers you need to build those. Now, one other thing before we leave this, and this is just an example of 10 feet, that's just a fictitious number, is the flush landing. And now I want to show you what that actually means. Before we leave this, I'll just tap on the information that says that if you turn this on, it says the top of the surface, the top of the staircase is 1 step lower than the top floor. and if it's off, the top step of the staircase is at the same height as the top floor. What does that mean? Okay, now we're back to the drawing, and again, this is a drawing that's within the calculator itself. So what it's talking about here is if it's on, that means that the top step of my stairway is one step, and in our case that's 7 inches or whatever it ends up being. It's one step lower. So basically your last step is off of the stairwell, off of your staircase. The last step is off of your staircase and onto the top floor. Now if you turn that off, it means that your last step is going to be even with the top floor. In other words, that top step would be up here. Now there's an advantage and a disadvantage for that. The disadvantage is that means it's going to move this whole stairway this direction one more step. You might not have room to do that. The advantage is when you go to connect this stairway to that second floor, because that's going to carry the load of your entire stairway. I would encourage you to have some other support someplace, but if not, then you are going to have to figure out how you're going to attach this stairway to that floor to carry that load. Now I've erased my line there a little bit, because if you go over here, and I don't know if you can read that or not, but it says the stairwell opening dimensions shown is without wallboard and trim. You need to take all of that into consideration. But the important one is number 7 here. It says provision for the kickboard, the ledger, and the reinforcement of the hanger board are not shown. You are responsible for assuring a safe and code compliant design. Number 7 is talking about this area right here. It's talking about how will you fasten your stairway to there. You probably can't see it on the drawing, but it looks like they've got a board in there. Might be a plywood, which is fastened to the back of your stringers, and then it's fastened to the second floor somehow. So that's very critical. So one of the advantages of having a flush stairway where you'd bring that second step up, it gives you a lot more room to fasten this to this. Now most of the time, if at all possible, what I try to do is I make sure I've got a supporting wall that's directly underneath my top step. So I'm not entirely dependent upon that carrying this load. And it's very important. When I design a set of steps, I always think someday there's going to be 4 chubby guys moving a piano down this stairway, and I want to make sure it's not going to move. So we can do that in 2 ways. I can put a support wall here. I can put another support wall someplace in the middle, or if there are walls that are standing on both sides of the step, then I can fasten that stringer right to those studs on the other side. On every other stud or whatever the case might be, I can take a lag bolt and I can fasten that into those, and that also works very good, and it makes it a very solid stairway. So those are some of the things that we need to look at. Now I'm going to show you exactly what I did for the stairs in our barn. And I know that my stairwell rise from the first walking surface to the top walking surface, in other words from one floor to the next, is 9 feet 11 and 1/2 inches. That's my total rise, so I'm going to click that in as my rise. And then I don't know what the stair opening, the finished opening, needs to be, so I'm just going to go in and I'm going to click my stair function. Now here it still has 14 feet 2 inches. That's actually what was the last time I used it, when I had the fictitious number 10 in there, 10-foot rise. This is the number that it had put in there, so it's still stored in there from the last time I used this. So the best thing for me to do is to make sure that my risers, it still has the 7-inch riser height. That's what I want it to be. I want to click my riser limit So I turn that on so it can't go over 7 inches. I'm going to again tap on this. I'm going to put in 0 and I'm going to put done. Now it just so happens that it comes back and gives me that 14 feet 2 inches. So I'm going to leave my flush landing on. So in other words, my top step is going to be one step, 1 7-inch increment below my upper floor, and my flush landing here is on. My headroom still is at 6 feet 10 inches. My ceiling thickness is 10 inches, and that's not terribly important when you're cutting your steps out. It is important if you're going to go with a flush landing, however. So my stringer size is 2 by 12. Now one of the things that I do, and this can end up being a cost overrun for you, because I do not use construction lumber 2 by 12s. Now you may want to do that, and it's far more economical to do that, but probably for the last, I have no idea, 8 or 10 years, every time I build a set of steps, I use LVL, laminated veneer lumber, and they're 11 7/8 inches thick, or tall, I should say. They're 1 3/4 inches thick, and then you can get them in whatever length that you want. And there's so much variation in construction lumber nowadays that you could buy 2 boards and there might be a 1/4 inch difference in the thickness of them, or excuse me, of the breadth of them. So they might be 11.5 inches, 11.25 inches. There's a lot of variation there. And so my fractional resolution, I'm just saying that I could change this and say I want it to a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, but a 1/16 inch is very sufficient for building a set of steps. Now I go down here to my calculated results. So my calculated results is that my calculated riser height is 6 and 5/8 inches. I'm going to end up with 18 risers, and my overage is 1/4 inch. My calculated tread width is 10 inches. And the reason I'm going to leave that at 10 inches is because I'm going to have a bullnose on my step, so the surface area for my foot to land on is going to be a total of 11 inches. I'm going to end up with 17 treads, and my overage is 0, and my minimum finished stairwell opening is 11 feet 4 and 5/8 of an inch. My stringer length is 1611, so if I get a 17-foot board, that'll be sufficient. And my calculated rise is what I put in up here, 9 feet 11 1/2 inches. My calculated total is 9 feet 11 1/4 inch. So there's a 1/4 inch variation, but I can virtually guarantee you, unless you do some really fine measuring, you'll never notice that. So that's how I calculate all of those things. Now I'm going to go down here, and there's one other thing that I can do. I can go up here, clear back to the top, and basically what I'm looking at here is what's called the basic analysis type. But for a moment I'm going to go to the advanced. And I've built lots of steps and never used this, but it's available, and I'll show you what it does for you. It adds all of these other parameters: the riser thickness, 3/4 of an inch, tread thickness, sub-riser thickness, and all of these other information that is available to you, whether you ever use them or not. I guess that depends on your particular application. Calculated incline, and all of these others. Most of these are on the other. But the layout, this is the reason I went to advanced. When I go to the layout, I can click on the stringer layout. I'm going to just use the Word application to pull this up. Now this is difficult to see, but this is a printable document. So I can send this to my printer, and I could take this after I've calculated everything out and make sure that my measurements are right, and I could actually email this to someone or print it off and take it to them to a subcontractor or whatever it is and say, this is what the stairwell that I need, or the set of steps that I need built, and they can build them off of these drawings. So let's go back, and I'm going to click on the stringer installation. Again, use my Word application, and here's this drawing. Now this drawing is the one that I've been using here, and like I said before, this drawing is available on the calculator. You don't have to do anything except go to the advanced part, go down there and click on stringer installation, and that stringer installation will give you all of this information. So now on my drawing here, here's my rough rise from walking surface to walking surface, and there it has my 9 feet 11.5 inches. I just left this unknown. It put in 10 inches, so my hanger board is 3/4 of an inch, and it needs to be this long, and that's talking about this board that's right here that's tying my steps to the second floor. It's telling me that my minimum rough stairwell opening needs to be 10 feet 10 and 13/16 of an inch. So from this surface to this surface, I need that much distance so that I maintain my, it's from the nose of each step up. So I'm maintaining my 6 feet 8 inch clearance. And then down here it's telling me that I need at least 13 feet 3¼ inches that I can get from one end to the other. So I need that much room. Now, once I figured these all out, we pretty much had our rough floor plan drawn out, and I don't have 13 feet 3¼ inches to build my steps. My room stops here. I've got basically 12 feet, and I've got a wall here, and I've got a wall here. So either I have to move these steps this direction, and my wall's here, and the bottom of the steps are going to come out into another room, or if I move them this direction, my wall's going to be here, and they are going to be protruding into the next room, which in our application, this side of that wall happens to be our milking parlor. What we did here, we actually intruded into this room, and we just end up with this as in the ceiling. And the reason I wanted to move it this way and cut it into the next room on this side instead of this side is because we're not heating this space upstairs. So at the base of this stairway, I wanted that to be on the back side of this wall so I could put an exterior insulated door here, and that will close off our loss of heat going upstairs. So now I'm back on my calculator looking at the parameters that I put in, and there's one other thing that I wanted to show you because I want to show you a drawing and I want to show you where I got that. So here's my 9 foot 11.5 inches. These are the input parameters, my 7 inches, etc., etc. And then these are my calculated results. Well, if I go to the bottom of the input and I look at the bottom of the screen, actually it's there wherever you're at, but this little information button here, I'm going to click on that, and this gives me all kinds of information. And this is, if you're not familiar with building steps, it's worth your while to read this. As tedious as it might seem, it'll give you a much better understanding. But if you scroll down a ways, you will find this parameter, and that's what I want to show you. So moving from the calculator, again, I took that drawing and I printed it off so that I can show you a few things. The first thing that I want to show you is where we get the parameters that we need to be acknowledged when it comes to complying with code. So the 10-inch minimum that it talks about is basically from the corner, you just think of your stringers in here and it's cut out. So from the back corner to the front, that minimum is 10 inches. But as I mentioned earlier, that 10 inches has to be increased. If you only have 10 inches there, it has to be increased by at least 1 inch so that your landing surface for your foot is at least 11 inches across here. So the minimum is 10 inches. The effective distance is 11 inches on the surface. Now the variation from one step to the other, according to a code, can't be above 3/8 of an inch. So every single step, no matter which one that you would compare it to, you can only have a variation of 3/8 of an inch. Now also according to code, and it may be different, I do some work in some cities. Cities have their own code. Sometimes they use international code, sometimes they don't. So you need to be mindful of where you're at. If you have a building inspector, he might likely be a good source for how to find that information. So the other thing is the amount of rise. So from the top of this step to the top of this step, code requires that does not exceed 7 3/4 of an inch. 7 3/4 of an inch from here to here. It's kind of curious because I'm working on a remodel project right now, and the top step, the riser height is 7 inches. Every other step is 8 inches until you get to the bottom step and it's 9 inches. So those are way out of code. We're leaving them because we're not changing anything, and the homeowner doesn't want to tear them out and sacrifice the space that would be necessary to bring it up to code. So we're not altering anything there, but you'll find that often. So maximum variation from riser height is 3/8. Maximum variation on tread width is 3/8 of an inch. So if you maintain that, and the reason that's important is when you start running up a set of stairs, and I'm sure every one of us has run into this, if there's some variation and it's over 3/8 of an inch, I can almost guarantee you after you get to the third or fourth step, if you hit that variation, you're going to trip, because your body gets used to that rhythm and you're only lifting your feet just as high as what they need to be to clear the next step. And if that's off, you'll find yourself picking yourself back up. And this is the ceiling thickness that we were talking about earlier. That's on there. And this, obviously, this is cut down, but this is your ceiling opening, your finished opening, it's called. And then, of course, your stringer length. So your rise, your run, and your finished opening. Those are the three most important things. So back to the question, what if I don't have that much room? Well, this might be a little bit over and above. We didn't have to do any of this because we were going to make this work one way or the other. I get kind of finicky when it comes to building steps. And but one of the things that you can do is that you can introduce a turn. Now my experience has been that doesn't really gain you a whole lot. Basically what that means is that I would come up halfway on my steps, and then I would have a landing built in here, and then my steps would turn and the second half of the flight would go up this direction. But when you introduce that, you have certain limitations that you have, how big that landing has to be before you can change directions. Now there's one thing that I didn't mention, but the highest the greatest rise that you can have from walking surface to walking surface is 12 feet 7 inches. And if it goes over 12 feet 7 inches, even if it goes over one step more than 12 feet 7 inches, one more 7-inch increment, you have to have a landing. Now, if you have a 12-foot 7-inch rise, basically you're looking at 20 to 22 steps. So that's quite a bit. So the landing serves a purpose for a person coming up. You've got a place where you can stop and rest, I guess, before you take the next flight. And you'll find that often in commercial buildings where there is more than 12-foot rise from walking surface to walking surface. So one of the things that you can do is that you can introduce a landing if you have enough room. but that takes more room sideways than it does lengthwise. And I've done that, but most of the time you don't gain a whole lot, but it might be enough to get you by. Another thing you can do is you can put in a spiral staircase, and I've done very few of those because they're typically pre-manufactured. They're really expensive, and basically if you have anything that you need to move to the basement, you're not going to do it with a spiral staircase. You need that continuous opening so that you can get in there. But as I mentioned earlier, the way that we accomplished that, because I was 2 steps short, and this is my wall, we ended up cutting that bird's mouth, or that box that in, so it goes into our milk room, our milking parlor, and that's how we made this work in our particular application. I want to go back to this drawing for just a second, because the way they have this drawn out is the way I like to do this. I will lay out my stringer, but I put my riser in first, and the reason I do that is when I put my tread in, I can come in behind and I can nail that through there into this riser. Now some people will put that riser on top of the steps, and I've got another drawing here that looks like this, and that's what's represented here, is how this riser is setting on top of this step, and you don't have the reinforcement that you do here. I glue everything. I glue this where my tread lays on my stringer. I glue the back of the riser onto the tread. I nail that through there, and it just really helps increase the strength of that tread. I typically use pre-manufactured. You can buy them in 12-foot lengths, and it has the bull nose on there. It's wide enough to meet your code. It just makes things a lot simpler. Back in the day, everybody would use 2x lumber to do that. If they were conscientious, some people use just 1x's, and those are the ones that crack and creak and everything else. So that's just one of the things. This is a very critical thing, as I pointed out on the calculator, that this is where you're tying your stringer into your second floor. That needs to be very substantial, because that's going to carry the weight of your stringer. So the next question is, how do you actually go about building these steps? Well, the most important thing is getting your stringer laid out. So I go back to my calculator, and I find that my desired tread width is 10 inches. My calculated riser height is 6 5/8 of an inch. And again, my calculated tread width is 10 inches. So I take those two numbers, and I get my framing square out, and I use these things. They're called step gauges, and some people will just take a board and use spring clamps to hold it onto their framing square, but these are much more secure, and you don't want it moving when you start laying these things out. But basically, I'm going to take those two numbers. I've got my 10 inches, so I'm going to take one and put it on my framing square. And this is a smaller framing square. It's only an 8x12. I typically use a longer one. So I've got this is my tread width, my 10 inches. And then on the other blade, I am going to put it at my 6 5/8 of an inch. So I put this one on there at 6 5/8 of an inch. And again, my framing square is a little rusty, so this may not show up the best, but you can take my word for it. So I've got my 6 5/8 inch on this blade. I've got my 10 inches on this blade. And then it's just a matter of laying that out. And I take my pencil and I draw it on my stringer, and I just keep moving it as I work my way down. There's a lot of other videos out there that if you want to look at, will show you exactly how to do that are very helpful, and I would encourage you to do so. It's difficult sometimes to answer every perceived question that might be. If you have some questions, you can certainly contact me, and I will do my best to help you out with that and walk you through it if I need to. We want to be as much help as we can to everyone, and encourage you to do things on your own. As a contractor, a lot of people, homeowners, are apologetic about their work they do, but I just encourage everybody, just get in there and try. Everything can be fixed, and you just want to do your best. One other thing, that there's some people, and this is just a personal quirk of mine, that some people will put their step gauges, they will put this on this side of the blade at 10 inches, and then they draw their line on the inside instead of on the outside. The only reason I do it differently and put them on the outside, which I think a lot of people do as well, is that when I do that, then I draw my line on the outside, and then I extend it past, and I'll just go ahead and do that on this mat. So when I take that and I extend that past, I don't know that you can see that or not, but my lines actually cross, and that's much more definitive, because if I draw it on the inside, sometimes that line does not come clear to a point. It did there, and you can make it work, but that's just one of my things. I can overdraw it. So that's how you build steps, that's how you come up with the numbers, and that's the majority of the battle, is just getting the numbers right. So again, if there's anything we can do to help you out, I would love to do that. Just let us know, and we will get back to you.